Hello, students. We are finally in the home stretch, 3 weeks to go, and we are back in Rome. Our focus this week is going to be the fall of the Roman Republic and how that republic turns into the Roman Empire. So get ready. We're going to get started with the Caesars. Julius Caesar, and then his adopted son, nephew, relation, Augustus. So that is our focus today. This is kind of one long lecture that I'm going to break into two. So we're going to start with Julius Caesar, but everything that we're talking about with Julius Caesar is going to feed right into Augustus because both of them are searching for the answer to one essential question. That's where I want to start today. All right. Our essential question, the essential question that plagued Rome for centuries, is how does one gain power? And we've seen over the last few weeks in studying the Roman Republic that you can gain power in lots of ways. I'm going to ask you what those ways are in a second. But the question is more important is how do you keep it once you gain it? Right? So that's the essential question that we're going to look at today. How does one gain power? And once you have that power, how do you hold on to it? How can you keep that power and stop from getting assassinated, which is the problem that many of the Roman rulers are having up to this point. So let's collectively think back for a second to the precedents that have been established with regard to power in Rome. What have we learned so far? What precedents were established during the era of the club and dagger? What precedents are established at the beginning of the Roman Republic? And let me just remind us that a precedent is an earlier event which serves as a model for how things should happen. Right. So if we were doing this in class, I would make you shout out answers and I'd write them on the board and everything, but for right now, just take 10 seconds to think of some of these precedents, and then I'm going to go over the ones that I came up with. I came up with 7 that kind of have an influence on Julius Caesar, and his follower, Augustus Caesar. Here we go. So first of all, if you want power, you need money. Because even with the reforms that we've talked about throughout the Republic, there's still a huge wealth gap between the rich and the poor, the haves and the have-nots. And so if you want to rule, if you have money, you have access to a lot of power. If you can get the aristocrats on your side, then chances are you have a good chance of getting power. After all, the Senate, remember, is the 300 most powerful families, the wealthiest families, the oldest families in Rome from most of Rome's history. Right. What the Gracchus proved was that if you can't get the power through the support of the aristocracy, you can go to the people directly. Right? If you become the voice of the people, maybe the tribune of the plebs, you can use that to get elected, and once you're elected, you can run for re-election and push your own agenda through if you have the support of the general people. Of course, what happened to the Gracchus? The Senate got them assassinated. So you can't just have the people. You can't just have the aristocracy. Marius and Sulla come on the scene and they say, no, of course you can't just have those. You need soldiers. And Marius and Sulla use their loyal soldiers, whom they've essentially bribed with money and promised land and things like that. And behind the power of their soldiers, they have taken over Rome at various points in time. Right? Going all the way back to the rape of Lucretia. Okay? Romans fear kings. Right? This is the excuse that was used to assassinate Tiberius Gracchus. This has been referenced throughout Roman history that there are no kings in Rome. There is nothing so deadly in Rome or such a crime as to try to declare oneself a king. There will be no kings in Rome. All right. Proscription list used to eliminate enemies. The Senate published proscriptions against Gaius Gracchus during the Gracchi Revolution. Sulla publishes proscriptions when he takes over Rome. And, these hit lists are a great way to eliminate rivals, paying people to just murder in riots in Rome. All right? And more formally, you could declare rivals enemies of Rome, enemies of the state. And once that is passed by the Senate, you can pretty much kill these people on sight without fear of suffering any repercussions for your actions. And this is what the Senate did to Gaius Gracchus. I called him Gaius Gracchi on my son, but Gaius Gracchus. And then it's been done a couple of other times. And the last precedent I want us to consider is that you can declare oneself dictator for life. Remember, the Republic is usually led by 2 councils, but throughout the era of the Club and Dagger, those councils have been elected multiple times, long exceeding their supposed term limits. And Sulla, I believe, is the first to declare himself dictator for life. That happened to be 4 years for Sulla, but the idea was that he would get these kind of emergency powers that are usually reserved for times of war embodied in him, a sole ruler, until he decided they were no longer needed. And so this is the 7th precedent that is going to be really, really important when we talk about gaining and keeping power in Rome. So let's move forward with what actually happens that causes an opportunity for Julius Caesar. Right, Rome is struggling. The Republic is struggling. We have riots. We have corruption. We have all of these internal problems going on in Rome. But outside, external problems are also contributing. You have Germanic tribes invading from the north, encroaching on Rome's power. And so the Romans need to recruit more and more people into their army, and that's why they allow Marius to reform the army by allowing landless soldiers to join the army. And of course, it's those landless soldiers that are most loyal to their generals because the generals are promising them land, promising them wealth, promising them a better life. And so kind of those 2 middle bullet points, the Germanic tribes and the recruiting more soldiers, are linked together. And they lead to that 3rd point, or 4th point rather, which is that generals start trying to assert their own authority. It starts with Marius and Sulla, but it continues long after them. Remember, that was the last slide of the era of the Club and Dagger, that Rome is chaotic, and it's a lot of civil war. And it's in this world of civil war that Julius Caesar is born. Right? And Julius Caesar is from an aristocratic family. His father dies when he's a teenager, and he is forced to take on a lot of responsibility, and he goes to Spain and kind of makes a name for himself early on, but he's not yet wealthy, and he's certainly not yet powerful. But he is very charismatic, and he's certainly willing to get power and fame any way that's possible. That's his goal. Right? Similar to many people we've heard of in our studies, Achilles, Alexander the Great, right? It's all about that kleos. Julius Caesar is a little bit the same way. Right? So, Julius Caesar comes to power, finally, with the formation of what becomes known as the First Triumvirate. Right? Pompey, Crassus, and Caesar. In 60 BCE, they come together to form this 3-headed leadership of Rome. And kind of this First Triumvirate is the answer, or they hope it's the answer, to how you get power and keep it. Right? And they each bring a little something to the table. Now, Pompey and Crassus have been consuls before together. And they kind of used each other to take power, but now that they are in power, Pompey's been all fighting and making a name for himself as a general, and he has soldiers that are very, very loyal to him. He is responsible for expanding the Roman Empire east, going from Italy through Greece and into Asia Minor. He conquers most of the eastern expansion of the Roman Republic. or reconquers many of those areas. So he brings that like recent general, the loyal soldiers, the people who want land. He's bringing that aspect of the power. Crassus, on the other hand, also a general, is one of the wealthiest Romans of all time. While Pompey was off as consul conquering foreign lands and bringing wealth to Rome, Crassus was ruling Italy itself, ruling Rome itself, and he's protected the wealthy. Excuse me, my battery warning clicked on. He's protected the wealthy. He's famous for putting down the Spartacus slave uprising. And Crassus is incredibly wealthy and incredibly powerful. He's kind of got that aristocratic senatorial backing and wealth. Right? So we have the Senate, we have the military, but what don't we have yet? We don't have the ordinary people. And that's what Julius Caesar brings. As I said, he was charismatic. He was willing to walk down the streets and shake hands with anybody. When he's given some power in the Roman government, he puts on lavish games to entertain the masses. And he is a general in his own right. He has led conquest in Spain. He's getting his foothold in politics, and he's really the young go-between that kind of goes to Pompey and Crassus and says, hey guys, don't fight. If we all work together, we could be the rulers of Rome. And it works for a little bit of time. But each one of them has their own goals, right? Crassus wants to keep money and power. Pompey is hoping to kind of reinsert himself into Roman politics. He owes his soldiers land, and he needs to have the power in Rome to give his soldiers land and to stay on the right side of them. And Caesar, as we said, is looking for fame and glory. He's the young unknown. Pompey's already been named Magnus, great, Pompey the Great. Crassus already has made a name for himself. Caesar's the one who's kind of looking for that fame and glory. But as part of this triumvirate, he definitely gets it, because he goes off to fight those Germanic tribes and other people in Gaul, the Gaulois. He goes out in the 50s, 50 BCE, and he is fighting in Gaul. And to make sure everyone knows about it, he writes De Bella Gallica, or rather the Gallic Wars, right? This account written by Julius Caesar about Julius Caesar. He writes this all in the third person. So you can imagine what his goals are. They're to be famous. So he writes these stories that are published throughout Rome, sent back to Rome, that are like, you know who's a great general? Julius Caesar's a great general. You know who's a great guy to be around? Julius Caesar's a great guy to be around. And of course, Julius Caesar is the one writing all this stuff. It's kind of ridiculous. All right, so Julius Caesar does make a name for himself. He becomes more popular. He's trying to earn himself a triumph where if you're responsible for killing like 5,000 people or something, they'll throw you a big parade in Rome. And that's one of Caesar's goals. The triumvirate falls apart, though. Right? It technically ends in 53 BCE because Crassus is killed, off fighting somebody. But by 50 BCE, the split between Pompey and Caesar has reached a new breaking point. Right? Caesar tried to make sure he was always connected to Pompey by marrying off his 17-year-old daughter to I think he's 47-year-old Pompey, but that didn't last because Julius, his daughter, dies in childbirth, so that this thing that was supposed to heal the rift between the two men actually just causes it further damage, since kind of childbirth kind of blames Pompey for that circumstance, and so his daughter is dead, and now Julius Caesar is famous, and he's coming back as a war hero, having conquered Gaul. And I probably should have mentioned on the last slide, Gaul is modern-day France. And so Julius Caesar is going to return to Rome at the head of his army, and as every triumphant general has on their return to Rome, demanded land for their soldiers and kind of a triumphal march and things like that. And Pompey gets Julius Caesar declared an enemy of the Roman state. Right? Once again, picking up on this old precedent. He gets the Senate to declare Julius Caesar an enemy of the state, bans him from entering Rome. All right, and the Senate sends word to Julius Caesar, who's on his way back from Gaul, that if he enters Rome with his army, he will be declaring war on Rome herself. And the boundary of Rome is a river to the north. Right? It's called the Rubicon. And this becomes a thing that even comes up every now and again in modern day speak, that you have this moment in your life which is your Rubicon. You're crossing the Rubicon. And the Rubicon is this line of demarcation between what is northern, non-Roman territory, kind of in northern Italy into the Swiss Alps and things like that, and then what is really Roman territory in the peninsula, in the Italian peninsula. And so Caesar's army reaches this Rubicon, right? And this is the borderline. If he crosses the Rubicon, then he is declaring war on Rome. Okay? And he says Alia acta est, which is my poor attempt at Latin, but it means the die is cast. All right? And it's kind of this gambler's term almost, that he has taken the dice, or in this case the die, and he has thrown it. And from this point onward, depending on your beliefs, it's fate, it's luck, it's chance, whatever he rolls. All right? And so when, legendary, the saying is that Caesar crosses the Rubicon, he says the die is cast, kind of saying, look, I've made my move, I'm marching on Rome, we're going to see what happens from here. Maybe it's going to go badly, maybe I'll be shown to be the better man, what have you, but I've made my decision, I've controlled what I can control, the die is cast. And it turns out he rolled whatever he was looking for, because he defeats Pompey's army. Pompey flees. Caesar enters Rome at 49 BCE, and he is welcomed by cheering crowds and open arms, because he's bringing home all of these riches from his campaign to Gaul anyway. He's well liked in Rome, and suddenly, since he's the winning general, the people that even a week before were speaking ill of him suddenly have nothing but cheers and wreaths to lay at his feet and things like that. And Pompey escapes to Egypt. So Caesar might be in control of Rome, but he isn't yet the sole ruler. He needs to hunt down Pompey. And of course he does. He tracks down Pompey in Egypt. Actually, when Caesar arrives in Egypt, the young king of Egypt presents the head of Pompey in a box to Caesar. And he's like, hey, let's be friends. Here's the guy you came to kill. I killed him for you. Caesar actually isn't a big fan of that, but that's fine, because he is a huge fan of Cleopatra, the Egyptian queen. And he ends up taking her back to Rome with him. He has a son by her. Caesarion is the son of Julius Caesar and Cleopatra. And so kind of this is a side story of Egypt and Rome growing closer through Julius Caesar and Cleopatra. Later down the line, Cleopatra will end up with another Roman, a close friend of Julius Caesar, when Julius Caesar isn't around anymore. And she and Mark Antony will end up committing suicide by allowing poisonous snakes to bite them rather than surrendering and being captured. But anyway, that's a slight digression. And that's Elizabeth Taylor in the picture there, one of the most famous actresses of the early or mid 20th century, I guess. So anyway, the other thing that Caesar is famous for saying on this, actually way back with Pompey's head, is Veni, Vidi, Vici. I came, I saw, I conquered. Kind of this very Alexander the Great feel to it, that everything he sees, he ends up winning, and he's dominating everyone, whether it's in Spain, where he started as a young man, in Gaul more recently, or now in his march through Asia Minor after Pompey. Every place he has gone, he has conquered. When he returns to Rome, he is officially declared dictator for life, and he immediately is a tremendous reformer. He is, if we go back to thinking about the political parties, he's a popularis. He's looking out for the common people. And he passes laws that control debts. He reduces unemployment. He regulates traffic in Rome and builds things like roads and aqueducts and things like that. He also builds a new forum with a public library, all these things to help the commoner of Rome. He also revises the calendar, the Julian calendar, which is an adoption of Egyptian calendar with 365 days and a quarter day added every 4 years to fix the solar year and things like that. And kind of in honor of that, Quintilius, the 5th month, is renamed for Julius Caesar. And if you're thinking, what's the 5th month? That would be this month, May. But in Roman times, the first month was March. The start of spring was the start of the year. And so the 5th month was actually July. And so Quintilius, in honor of Julius Caesar, was renamed Julian? July. Anyway, whatever it was, it turned into July. So kind of the reason we have the month of July is because of Julius Caesar. But Julius Caesar was not long in charge of Rome, because at the height of his power, in 44 BCE, essentially he ruled for 3 strong years as the sole dictator of Rome. In 44 BCE, he is assassinated by senators that he thought were his friends. And if we had had a normal springtime, this is the moment where we would have paused in our lecture to read Shakespeare's play, Julius Caesar, the reenactment of the 3 days, well, plus a little bit extra, that are surrounding Julius Caesar's assassination. Right? He is stabbed 23 times by this ring of conspirators, and yet he dies kind of a martyr for the common man. Shakespeare does it better than anyone, but the funeral orations over Caesar's body stir up a riotous mob of the common men, and they rush through the streets of Rome, killing conspirators and people they accuse of being conspirators. And anyway, Julius Caesar becomes this larger-than-life figure. Right? All rulers after him, even in the modern day, will adopt the name Caesar. In Germany, in the more modern times, the rulers are known as Kaisers, right? Caesars. In Russia, the king is known as a Tsar. Once again, a Caesar. All right. But the fact is that the Republic is dying. Julius Caesar's death is actually the end of the era of the club and dagger. Tiberius Gracchus was clubbed to death. It is Caesar who is stabbed 23 times with conspirators' daggers. And his fall is really the fall of the Republic herself. As in the wake of the Civil War after Caesar's death, 2 sides emerge. Right? There's on one side, there's Caesar's assassins. Marcus Brutus, Gaius Cassius, the 2 big characters in the play Shakespeare, or the play Julius Caesar by Shakespeare. And then kind of the heirs of Caesar are known as the Second Triumvirate. And they include Mark Antony, who is Caesar's right-hand man, who's appointed a Roman consul, Marcus Lepidus, who's a Roman general, and Octavian Caesar, who is actually the great-nephew, great-nephew and heir of Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar actually adopts him as his son. So you have Mark Antony, Marcus Lepidus, and Octavian Caesar become the Second Triumvirate, and they lead an army against Brutus and Cassius and the conspirators, and they end up, the Second Triumvirate defeats the conspirators. They put over 300 senators to death. But much like the First Triumvirate, that Second Triumvirate cannot last either. And eventually, Octavian Caesar asserts himself and he becomes not a king, but a Caesar, the first real emperor of Rome. And let me just pause here to give a plug, excuse me, to the Edpuzzle video on Octavian. Right? It is a great Rise of Augustus, is Octavian Caesar. It is a great video. It's, I think, 17 minutes long, but it does a really, really nice job of talking about this transition from Second Triumvirate, where he ends up, Lepidus is thrown out of the picture pretty early on, but Octavian ends up turning the tables on Mark Antony, defeating Mark Antony, and becoming the sole ruler of Rome. But here's the thing about Augustus. This is what I want you to remember, is that Augustus is the one who answers our essential question. Not how do you gain power, but how do you gain power and then keep it? Because Augustus, or Octavian, sorry, I'm going to get to the red word on the screen, Augustus. Octavian becomes Augustus. Octavian knows how to keep power. He looks back at all of those precedents. He sees all of the failed rulers, and he thinks, how can I consolidate power? He knows a death sentence in Rome is to be called a king. So he will never be a king. The first title he appoints himself, he calls himself Romulus. He's reestablishing Rome. He is going to be her second founder. He is going to be Romulus. He pays this poet Virgil to write an account about essentially how he's related to Romulus and Remus, how he's related to Aeneas, even more ancient founder of Rome. Right? So he calls himself Romulus, never a king. Right? But in this brilliant move in 27 BCE, after essentially 10 years of civil war and then 2 years of Octavian ruling peacefully, he goes to the Senate and he resigns. He said, I don't want to be accused of being a king or a tyrant. I am Rome's liberator. I am the refounder of Rome, and so I will resign. And the Senate essentially panics. They're like, oh, no. If he resigns, we're going to have more civil war. Who's going to lead? We can't let him resign. No, please, Augustus, maintain your power, and actually here's more power. And they give him the title Augustus, the revered one. And so Octavian Caesar becomes Augustus, the Emperor Augustus, all right, meaning the revered one. But he doesn't just take on that title. He has all of these other titles. He doesn't even call himself Augustus. He refers to himself as Princeps. Princeps means the first among equals. He calls himself the first citizen. We're all citizens of Rome. I just happen to be the first citizen of Rome, right? He keeps himself in charge of the army. He takes on the title Imperator, which is where we get the word emperor. But he takes on the imperium power, which means that he is the sole ruler of the military. He knows that the generals have always, especially in the last 100 years, have always been part of these takeovers. And so he's very careful to rotate generals every 2 years in command of the legions so that they cannot become the one the soldiers are loyal to. They're going to get new generals all the time. It is Octavian who is going to be making decisions about where armies go and whom they're going to fight. So he retains imperium. He also appoints himself, or is elected, a little bit unclear. He becomes tribune for life. He's going to be the voice of the common people forever. So he is Romulus, he is Augustus, he is Princeps, he is Imperator, he is tribune for life. In his later years, he also takes on the title Pater Patriae, meaning father of the country, right? And if you watch the Octavian video, The Rise of Augustus, they talk about how at the end of his life throughout the Roman Empire, people cheers, they give toast, and they say, to the health of Augustus, to the health of the empire. They're one and the same. They've become synonymous because he is the father of this new Roman Empire. And so he's got the military unlocks, he's got politics, he's got the Senate giving him power. He's got the people giving him the tribune power. He's calling himself father of the country, the first citizen of Rome, all of these other things. And he becomes the leader of the religion. Pontifex Maximus, the head priest, the head of the Roman religion. So he really has all of his bases covered. And in fact, just talking about history and lineage and ties to today, the Pope, the Roman Catholic Pope, he still maintains this title, Pontifex Maximus. Right? It's a title from Octavian Caesar, who is now known as Augustus. But so to take all of this and prove that he is the most stable, Augustus rules from 27 BCE to 17 CE. So we're not talking about 10 years, we're talking about 44, well, it technically rules 29 BCs when he becomes sole ruler. So like 45, 46 years, he is the sole ruler of Rome. And under his leadership, the empire is established. And it begins this golden age of stability, wealth, relative peace, power across the Mediterranean world that will last for 200 years. Right? 45 years under Augustus and then another 155 years through Emperor Marcus Aurelius. That is known as the Roman peace, or the Pax Romana. And this is really the beginning of the Roman Empire. This huge multiple century stretch of peace and stability and building. All of the emperors, beginning with Augustus, well, really beginning with Julius Caesar, but through Augustus and beyond, they build all of these public works and roads and aqueducts to bring water down from the mountains into the cities, and they build bridges so that you can travel from one end of the Roman Empire in Egypt all the way through and up into even the British Isles eventually. It's all connected. And Augustus famously said, I found Rome a city of bricks and left it a city of marble. All right, massive public building projects. In fact, this little picture on our slide is the tomb of Augustus. And if you look really quickly, let me see if I can maybe just highlight this right over here. Those would be people. Those are people that are supposed to be giving you a sense of scale. Over here, this is the doorway to his tomb. All right, and of course, as all good rulers, Augustus has etched along his tomb all of the things that he accomplished. I believe this quote is actually on his tomb as well. But this huge tomb of Augustus is built in Rome. It survives to modern days. You go to Rome, it's being restored. If you traveled back in time 30 years or so, you could attend a concert in the tomb of Augustus. It's been a fort, it's been a concert hall, it's been all sorts of things, but it's this huge venue that's now being restored. And I want to give you another plug for one of our Going Beyond videos, is a Khan Academy video on kind of the art of Augustus and the way that he spreads his image, and the Prima Porta, his statue, and how that image is spread throughout the empire. But anyway, Augustus establishes the Roman Empire. He lays the foundation for success and peace, and that will last for 200 years. The next time we return to this, we're going to be talking about the 3rd century crisis. What happens in year 300? Because things stop being so stable and peaceful and prosperous. But that is next week's lecture. So until then, thanks so much for watching, and hopefully you'll do really well in that quiz.